Hello, BookTube. All right, we come to the end now. The end of The Prime Minister by Anthony Trollope, the penultimate novel in his Palliser series. This has been the story of two strained marriages. There have been other stories that have sort of played around the peripheries, but mainly it's about two strained marriages. Uh, One between the Prime Minister, the Duke of Omnium, and his wife, Lady Glencora, as to the nature of how he should prosecute his new office as Prime Minister, and the tempest in a teapot that arise over the fact that he is very thin-skinned, that he is a very thin-skinned and touchy, shy man. And the other strained marriage was between Emily Wharton and Ferdinand Lopez, an interloper to her family's settled plans that she should marry Arthur Fletcher and and continue the Wharton line. Her life had been written out, not officially and not out loud, but very much unofficially by all of her relatives in the country and in the city, and by her father, the wealthy lawyer, Abel Wharton, who, in addition to having his heart set on Arthur Fletcher, a boy he really likes, had also settled a huge amount of money on Emily, under the understanding that it would be her husband's and would help him in a career in Parliament or whatever. When Emily falls in love with Ferdinand Lopez and marries him, no money is forthcoming. And bits and pieces of it, little dribs and drabs of it, have to be screwed out of Mr. Wharton by pleading or dunning letters from his new son-in-law. It's an entirely soiling new arrangement. Wharton does his best to like Ferdinand Lopez, and for a while Ferdinand Lopez does his best to be liked by Mr. Wharton, but Ferdinand Lopez turns out to be a rather conniving little sociopath who mainly just wants what is due to him. And as with most men who think there's something due to him, the amount is constantly increasing. Such men never get as much as they think are due to them. They are always, to quote a very prominent sociopath on the world stage now, they are always being treated very unfairly, very unfairly. And a great arch of tension has gone out of this book now for the final 20 chapters that we're reading today, because Ferdinand Lopez is dead. Things went against him in every possible way. Blackballed from his club, ruined at his business, the talk of London for an obvious swindle that he conducted in order to get himself a measly £500 from the Duke of Omnium. And in response to all of that, he decides to kill himself, throws himself in front of a train, and has himself blasted to bloody atoms. And that was roughly where we ended our last batch of chapters. And when we start now, I mentioned last time that Trollope is very much in love with ending his books. He is sometimes getting about the business of bustling around boxes and taking down, putting coverings over the furniture. He's sometimes getting about the business of doing that, even when the book is at the halfway point. Sometimes it seems that way anyway. He's not an author that you expect big twists from at the end. He likes the long linger. And I don't know how that plays with the rest of you. A lot of you who are reading this book for this read-along have read other Trollope novels, either with me or on your own, so you're probably familiar with that habit on Trollope's part. But boy, oh boy, if you weren't, you're certainly getting a prime example of it in this book. Because from the minute that Ferdinand Lopez dies, we know what's going to happen to both those plots. We know that, right? I mean, it's not just a question of that Emily Wharton will eventually be brought around to forgive herself for ever making the bad mistake of loving Ferdinand Lopez, and will eventually allow herself to marry Arthur Fletcher and forget that the husband and the baby, forget the whole thing ever happened. We know that's going to happen. We know that from fairly early on, that unless Lopez kills them both, we know from the beginning that she is never going to have a change of heart, and neither is he. She's never going to come to love the man she has seen him to be, and he is never going to stop being that man. We already know that. So when he dies, the path is cleared. There's no baby anymore. When the husband is gone, the path is cleared for her to eventually make the plot line with Arthur Fletcher work, to put it in very mechanicalistic terms. And the same thing is true with the Duke of Omnium. We know he has been Prime Minister for 3 years, and we have had indications from the text that his stewardship of the country has not been all that bad. it has lacked any kind of storm. It has lacked any kind of drama. But we get the impression that the bulk of the country is prospering with him as prime minister. But it's a coalition government, and he is not a good leader. And we're told outright in these chapters, the chapters that we're reading today, we have a little scene with a couple of old stagers, Rattler and Roby, who've been with us many times. They've been all throughout the Palliser novels. They are the kind of men who are constantly plugging themselves into little offices here and there. They are the termites in the woodwork of national government. You're never going to be rid of them. They're always going to be there, no matter who's running the show. They'll never be quite out of power. They are the insiders. They are not these grand noble seigneurs who come in to do work and then go out when their principals tell them to. Instead, they're there all along. And they have a scene in the chapters that we're reading today that's eye-opening. It's just a gust of water in the face, where they talk about how there are scores of men in the coalition government who detest the Duke of Omnium. And they say why? Because the shyness, the incredible stiffness that we have seen him exhibit at his own home at Gatherum Castle, to his wife, to Major Pountney, an improvident place seeker. We've seen him be stiff and shy and awkward in all of those circumstances. And when we get this conversation with Rattler and Roby, we realize that he's been that way to everyone. Even when we haven't had the privilege of seeing the scenes, he has his private secretary send cold notes to people. He has diehard coalition members and fans who are voting for everything he does, and he never even bothers to talk to them. We see, in other words, in that scene and a couple of scenes like it, that although his ministry has been a success for the country, he has not been a success as a prime minister. And we should have seen that coming as well, because of his reaction to his wife's desire to be the greatest entertainer in the country, to smooth over the government, to make it work through social means, because she is not able to be prime minister herself, to smooth it over by social means, have all of these important people to Matching Priory or Gatherum Castle, show them the time of the weekend, invite them to the country for a week, talk with them, socialize with them, the better to consolidate your power amongst them. She tries hard on a few different occasions in the course of this book to explain this to her husband, and he is just dead set against it. A hopeless case. A hopeless case. And sure enough, in these chapters that we're reading today, right after, these chapters take place immediately after Ferdinand Lopez has killed himself. So he is gone. And the narrative tension is largely gone from the book as well. The one bit of narrative tension that remains is the Duke being in office, the Duke being prime minister. And shortly after, in the chapters that we're reading today, a measure is passed in the House, and it's passed by a majority of only 9. Only 9. And that pretty much tells the Duke, well, okay, I don't have the confidence of the House anymore. If on a major issue, on one of the most major pieces of legislation that I've been acting on as Prime Minister, I can only gather a majority of 9 votes, then it's time for me to leave. And there is no disguising. When the Duke starts to talk about that, there's no disguising the relief. Trollope never actually really hits that nail on the head too hard, but it is obvious that the Duke is not only relieved that he now has a tangible reason to leave office, but happy about it. I don't think you read those chapters as well as I did, you might have come to a different conclusion. I don't think there's any other conclusion to come to. The way he's written, he seems happier, more cheerful, more outgoing, like a man who's had a great weight lifted from him. Of course, it's a desolation to Lady Glen. A desolation. She hates the feeling of being beaten. She hates the feeling of all that work having gone for nothing. But either way, the Duke now knows that his ministry will end. He will go and say to the Queen, I do not have the confidence of the House anymore, so I will dissolve my government and you must form a new one. And there's a question that lingers in these chapters of whether or not the Duke will be part of that new government. The man who is the foremost candidate to run that new government very much wants him to be. All of his friends very much want him to be. He doesn't really want to be, because he clearly wants out of government. But there's one point where he retires to his room. Once he knows for sure that his time as Prime Minister is over, he retires to his room and contemplates to himself Then he went alone to his own room and sat there without moving for a couple of hours. Surely it was a great thing to have been Prime Minister of England for 3 years, a prize of which nothing could now rob him. He ought not to be unhappy, and yet he knew himself to be wretched and disappointed. It had never occurred to him to be proud of being a duke, or to think that his wealth, otherwise than chance incident of his life, advantageous indeed, but by no means a source of honor. And yet he had been aware that he owed his first seat in Parliament to his birth, and probably also his first introduction to official life. An heir to the dukedom, if he will only work hard, may almost with certainty find himself received into one or other regiment in Downing Street. It had not in his early days been with him as it had been with his friends Mr. Monk or Phineas Finn, who had worked their way from the very ranks. But even a duke cannot become prime minister by favor. Surely he had done something of which he might be proud, and so he tried to console himself. But to have done something was nothing to him, nothing to his personal happiness, unless there was also something left for him to do. How would it be with him now? How for the future? Would men ever listen to him again, or allow him again to work in their behoof, as he used to in his happy days in the House of Commons? He feared that it was all over for him, and that for the rest of his days he must simply be the Duke of Omnium. And from that passage you will note two things. That Trollope was probably the last person writing in English to ever use the word behoof, and also how insufferable the Duke is. What a horrible passage that is. And there are plenty of them like that. You want to slap him right through the page. He retires and for 2 hours tells himself, well, I guess I'll just have to be the Duke of Omnium now. Will I ever be useful again to my country? It's so syrupy. It's the exact kind of internal sentimental weakness and wallowing that his wife never does, never indulges in. He says at one point that he tells Mrs. Finn, who was Madame Max Goesler, he says, what does he say here? Yes, my wife so mixes up her mirth and her woe together that I myself sometimes can hardly understand her. He doesn't understand the higher emotions. He doesn't understand passion. And passages like that underscore that fact, that he just sits there and mopes. And then thinks, well, maybe I'll console myself with being the richest and most powerful nobleman in the country. And of course, eventually, at the very end of the book, there's a tiny amount of tension. It's not much to speak of, not like we've seen in the earlier parts of the book. Eventually, when it comes to it, he agrees that he will not have any part of a new administration. Why hamper the new administration, he tells his friends, by having the loser, the former administration, hanging around, exercising some sort of nominal power. Instead, he proposes to his wife that they take the children and go on vacation. That they make a tour of Italy, perhaps, or go to Norway or something like that. That they leave the country. And his wife is Lady Glenn is flouncing between genuine disappointment and just raillery against him. She wishes that he were stronger. That's all there is to it. There's one passage that says that and moves on right away. And that really is the heart of it. She wishes that he were stronger. And she tells him, well, wherever we go is fine. If we go to Norway, I'll bundle against the cold. If we go to Italy, I'll take some medicine to ward against, the heat or whatever. She really doesn't care now that she's not the Prime Minister's wife anymore. And that disappointment is wrapped up with the Wharton plotline, which moves inexorably. I mean, gracefully. Trollope is always fun to read, so even when he's doing a long finish like this, you're still enjoying yourself. He moves gracefully to the end, and the end will be, already, it will be a dozen chapters of Emily Wharton telling Arthur Fletcher, I'm not ready, I'm not worthy of you, I can't do it, not yet. And then eventually coming around, and so we know that that's coming, and we get that, and it's, well, I love it. I find it very comforting. I like saying a long goodbye in Trollope novels. I like the way he does it. I'm curious to know what you think, because that's what we're at here. We're at the end now. Our next Sunday would be a read-along, except that we're out of books. I miscalculated the chapters, big surprise. So instead we're going to do a Q&A. So we'll do that next Sunday, but aside from that, we're done with the Prime Minister. So I'm wondering what you thought of this long fourth movement, this long falling off of major notes to minor notes. What did you make of the end of the book? A couple of you have unwisely looked at the first chapter of the next book. and so you look, if you've done that, then Lady Glencora saying to her husband, well, if we go to Italy, I'll protect myself against the heat somehow, against malaria somehow. It's no major concern of mine what we do now that I'm not Prime Minister's wife anymore. But for the book itself, should it have ended in a different place? Do any of you begrudge Trollope his long endings? I hope not. I hope we've read enough Trollope now so that you don't. But it is the signature of this author either way. So you have to deal with it either way. So let me know what you thought, and I want to thank you all again for indulging in this Palliser habit of mine. So we've done the Prime Minister now, and that was great fun. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.